So I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that data's been top priority now for the last few years. But the pandemic's really only just focused that more. But I'm going to put a controversial question to you then, Barry, to start with. So do we actually need chief data officers?
So I think there's a lot of noise in the market about data. So I think there's still a lot of people talking about data, data hype. And I think what you need in an organisation, regardless of what it's called, is you need leadership. And you need leadership for data, and that is sadly lacking, right? And I think, if you didn't have a CFO in the organisation, you'd be be bedlam, right? And it's the same for data. So every organisation I go into, it's bedlam. And everyone I talk to is bedlam, right? Despite all the hype and all the talk, it's still pretty much bedlam, right? So yes, whether you call it a chief data officer, you need someone in the organisation, for me anyway, that's leading data and educating people and kind of building the ecosystem and the culture that allows that to kind of develop to where it should be, right?
Yeah, no, I'm totally in agree with you. I think it's really interesting when you compare it to the chief finance officer, because there's mass acceptance, isn't there, about CFOs. No organisation would debate about not having a CFO, but the average tenure for CDO is 2.5 years. And what do you think about that? And what can you do in 2.5 years?
So I think you can do a lot. So I've started in organisations in Bank of Ireland and Allianz specifically, right, where there was nothing. And then by the time I left, the organisation was kind of moving and they've matured. So I think as long as you've got the right people coming in after you, 2.5 years is okay. But I think any shorter than that, and it's just not enough time. Just getting the kind of communication and the change into the organisation so everyone's starting to talk the right language takes at least 12 to 18 months, at least. And even, so in the organisation I'm in now, everyone talks about data being important, but no one really knows what it means. And what I found really interesting is that, the challenge is that I kind of got this kind of toolkit almost. But this organisation's different, and the communication and the way they interpret things is completely different, right? So I don't like data governance, the term data governance, and I like to call the team data value management, right? Because it kind of says, yes, management, doing things, getting things done, and value, right? So there's something that comes out that's worthwhile for the company. Well, believe me, it was totally misconstrued. And so I created this organisation structure for them, and they're running in Agile. And they took out the whole data value management chapter, right? Because they thought the value was already in the business. And I'm like, what? How did that work? And so I think that communication and, it's going to take me at least another 12 months to kind of get everyone starting to think and talk the same way.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I use the term data governance, where we're always talking about, can you get a better term for it? Can we come away from it? Because it's a bit boring and a bit dry, and it's almost like trying to do data governance by stealth. So do you think that's what you've tried to do with your storytelling, changing the name around?
Well, not only that, so I think it's what I call the 1970s IBM model, right? And it's all about command and control. You've got to have a glossary, and everything's got to be in it, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that. It doesn't work that way now. Most companies are kind of moving agile-esque, right? And again, agile is a bit like data, right? It's a bit abused. But I mean, things move so fast, and you're trying to get people to collaborate. You're trying to enable them to do their job better. You're not trying to command and control them. And I think even Gartner's come out a couple of years ago and said, it shouldn't be about command and control. It's all about collaboration. It's all about basically transparency. And it's all about getting people to kind of use data in the right way.
Yeah, well, that's music to our ears at the ODI. So a whole message there. So what do you think the greatest challenges are that a CDO faces?
I think it's finding your place in the organisation. So I kind of talk about a CDO being a conduit for change. So at Allianz, I kind of was ramming up against the change organisation because I was almost trying to build this change organisation in data, and we were doing things that change wasn't doing. And IT was my friend, right? And then in other organisations I've been in, IT's not my friend. And now I'm in IT. The business is kind of looks at me like an IT person. And so it depends on where you are in the organisation. And then it's trying to turn that message around so that people realise that you are that conduit and you are trying to do what's best for the organisation. So to kind of take that organisation first approach. Because I think the problem if you walk into an organisation and you it looks like you're creating an empire, you automatically start getting people to sort of say, oh, he's just creating an empire. It's all about him. It's all about data, blah, blah, blah. And actually, again, data is just one of the components in the ecosystem of an organisation. And therefore, you've got to kind of, it's a great conduit. So you've got to try and be that conduit, regardless of where you sit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think CDOs, or whatever they're called, are change agents. I think I was identifying one of my organisations I worked for previously, but working with the change management as a change agent, and it was almost like giving you the permission to shake things up, because you don't go in there, do you, on purpose to shake things up?
I do.
All right, very different approach. But I think you do end up shaking it up because it's natural, because you can see the way that it doesn't work. So is that your MO, that you go in to shake it up?
Yeah, I'd call myself a disruptor, but in a positive way, right? So it's about that collaboration. So most organisations I see, that there's silos, right? And you're trying to break down those silos. And people aren't in silos because that's the way they want to be. It's just that there's not any way of delivering that transparency and them understanding what their impact is across the entire organisation. So you talk about data quality, and someone at the front end doesn't realise that when they skip a couple of fields, or they kind of put astronaut in job because it's the first field, the impact it has down the organisation. So I think it's just about making sure that you disrupt in the right way, because change takes years, right? It's not like you just walking in. Change, to your point about tenure, 3 to 5 years, right, to really change an organisation. And you don't do that by just doing things the way you've always done them. You have to create some disruption, but hopefully that's about getting rid of inefficiencies and kind of making sure that the organisation thinks about the way it's structured and all those kind of things.
Do you think we should be bolder then as chief data officers going in there saying we're disruptors? Because I do think we say we're change agents and stuff, the nicer, but obviously you're going in more hardline with the disruption.
Personally, in my opinion, yes. So there's a lot of what I call token CDOs. So people who are appointed to a CDO position whose only job is to get their next job, right? And it's not about driving the data agenda, or it's just about they're a CDO, they're a senior position, and they kind of in the organisation, and they kind of need to just do the admin stuff and get on with it. That for me is not a CDO. A CDO needs to be that conduit for change. They need to basically be prepared to almost be out of a job in 2 to 3 years, and then let the next person come in and kind of continue that change. So you kind of need that fresh blood for me every now and then as well.
Do you think it's fresh blood because it's sometimes a hard journey? I know I've once given my team a cup that says never, never, never give up from Secret Santa, and they knew it was me. So you think that that's why you need that fresh blood coming in? Because obviously sometimes I think the data world, it is a hard job to keep that momentum.
Yeah, I think you just need to be resilient as a CDO, right? You kind of need to realise that, some day it's almost like, say, I'm bipolar. So one day I'm super happy, and the next day I'm like super sad, because things don't always go your way. But as long as you've got a clear roadmap, and you're educating people to kind of support you on that journey, you'll get there eventually. But you've got to be resilient, because it is a tough job if you're trying to do it properly.
Yeah. And it's interesting you touched on there about sitting within the IT department. It's interesting, isn't it, where you sit within the organisation? Because I've seen it that if people are having a problem with their laptops, then data gets a hard time. And if the IT is working well and you're in that department, then you're all right. So what's been your experiences about sitting in different departments, and what's your reflections on that?
So up until this recent gig, I always kind of said, never report to CIO, never report, it's wrong, blah, blah. And I had quite of a hard position. And then when I talked to these guys, I kind of realised that they were the ones in the organisation who wanted the change, and they wanted someone to do that change for them. And the first thing I said to them was, data doesn't belong in IT. That was the first thing I said when I had the interview. And they were like, you're right. And I thought, okay, well, this is going well. So I think it depends on what your support is. You've got to have 3 or 4 people on the board who support you, not just one, whether it's a CFO, CIO, or whatever it might be. So I just think, again, it's about that resilience and the ability to kind of, if you're asking people to change, you've also got to change and be adaptive as well.
Yeah. And what about sitting on the board then? Because I've been in organisations where a CDO have sat on, the executive team, and others where it's not. So what do you think about that? Because you just mentioned there that you need some of your advocates, and if you haven't got that, then that makes it harder.
There aren't that many CDOs sitting on the board, right? So I don't really think the role's still very mature, which is why I think that you need someone at that level, for sponsorship. I actually think it has to be eventually the way we're going digital. It has to be. You can't have digital without data. If you understand data properly, you also kind of understand the technology. You have to understand the process and all the rest of it. So you should have the toolbox to kind of help the board make the right decisions. The other thing is maybe bring in some NEDs. So maybe some of the chief data officers need to start thinking about getting some NED training. And so coming on as a NED, independent, so again, you can be a little bit more disruptive, and you haven't got some of the politics to play with. That might be another way of kind of making the kind of position more cemented and making it work.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So it's interesting because we just did I don't know if you replied to the data protection consultation that the UK government came out with. And one of the things we were thinking about was actually, because there was a discussion in there about getting rid of the data protection officer role. And actually we thought, do you know what we really need is a data leadership role in an organisation, just really be promoting that. In the same way you have that CFO. So it's less about just thinking about data protection, it's more about thinking about data. I don't know if you guys responded to that or if you read the consultation.
No, well, the company I work for was in Holland. It's a Dutch company, so...
I'm not going to be worried by that.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? What about qualifications then for CDOs? Because one of the things, because we are a new profession and other professions have, continual professional development, but there's not so much. I mean, there are some stuff like I'm a certified data management professional, but there's not things that are widely adopted across the world. Is that something you've seen as well or you've looked into?
So everywhere we've always created academies, which I think is important. But for me, I think it's about you've got to have CDOs from different backgrounds. And I think as a CDO, you've got to have different experiences. So you've got to have worked in IT at some point or at least understand the technology. For me, like a business analyst background is really good because you understand process and you understand how to connect things. And I think just having a good business background is important, regardless of what your other things you've done in your career. Because if you're not doing this to kind of improve the business and give better customer experience, then why are we doing it, right? And I think that too much of it will be is generally focused on the technology or on the data governance stuff, right? And I think that it needs to be a bit broader. So communication is super important. So we underinvest in communication all the time. And so I think it needs to be the right spectrum of qualifications. And my concern is that they just kind of make it technology or they make it data management or data governance.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think that's probably why you see in the diversity of CDOs and all our backgrounds that it's really diverse, isn't it? When you talk to many of us, I think we've all got that theme of wanting to do the best, like data enabling the business. But it is a really diverse background. I mean, I know people who have been economists and all sorts that come in. I mean, my background was environmental science, so it's really, really interesting how that actually adds to it because you are bringing in all those different elements that you've learned throughout. I think for me, when I did my certification in data management, and it was hard doing it later on in your career rather than earlier, I passed, so it was all right. But I think it just gave the common language, which I thought was good across the private and public sector to be able to talk to anybody and know that we were comparing like for like. So that was quite useful from that perspective.
I also find, the reason I really like being in this job is because, it's really diverse, but everyone likes to share. Right? It's not like people kind of hold tight on, I've done this really cool thing and it worked. They also tell you what doesn't work. And so there's a lot of collaboration, even amongst CDOs, which I think is really refreshing. It's not, you don't generally see that in a lot of other areas.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually, because I think the CDO community is actually really strong, isn't it? We're always meeting up. We've got different, different channels for communicating, because I think we're all trying to get to the same aim, is what's best for the business, enabling our organisations, and doing that's a hard job. And someone's always been there and done it, haven't they? Which is quite handy, because I think there's also a focus on I always call it the Gucci stuff, like machine learning and AI, rather than like getting the fundamentals right so that you can, do the compliance, but then maximise opportunities. There's a space for both. Is that what you've seen as well?
Yeah, the whole AI thing is a really good example of the noise, right? Data scientists are the unicorn. They're these amazing individuals. They can do all this stuff. Well, actually, it wasn't one individual, it was about 3 different roles, right? And then all of a sudden people were saying, oh, we need data engineers. All of a sudden data engineers are really important. I was like, well, they were always important. We were just assuming that the data scientists were going to do it. And they didn't like doing that work, right? For good reasons. And so I just think that, we just need to realize that we actually need really diverse, group of people. And there are different jobs. There's no, one thing is the CTO is the ultimate job and you have to be all these things. You can be good at some things and across your team, you have other people who support you. It's just the way it should work, right?
Yeah, so what roles have you had in your data offices? Because I know that when I went into one of my last roles, it was almost like as a data specialist, it was like a breath of fresh air, seeing the different roles and specialists. They were split out between, you did have data governance, you had data strategy, data standards, data quality, data engineer, data architects, and they all flowed in the right way. Is that how you've seen it set up in other places? What's been the best roles to have in a data office?
So I personally think that CTO should own everything, right? So data science and data engineers do not sit in IT. At Alliance we had the data value management team, which was your quality, your data governance, traditional stuff, process BAs, that kind of thing. Then you had your data modelers, so that was for your enterprise data warehouse. You had data scientists, data engineers, and I had a technical guys as well doing something as well. So that kind of, I actually took people out of IT into the data organisation, which was something that hadn't been done before. And so that we were all, and the other thing I've done is basically bring in change, so to the leadership team, and change, and there was also IT, so I also had someone from the IT department. So it was like, again, it wasn't the data team doing stuff, it was, if we're going to influence the organisation, you guys need to be coming in and at the leadership level and basically making sure that you've got a way to contribute to that, right? So we weren't kind of one-dimensional, it was almost a check. And then at DSM, they've gone agile, so we had to create a tribe and chapter structure. So we had data foundations, so that's your data management governance stuff, BI and reporting, graph, and we had data science and data engineers, but we've actually folded the graph into the data science chapter. And so that was kind of interesting for me because I almost had to take what I've seen and done in an organisation structure and then flip it into kind of agile.
Yeah, and that's working well in the different structures.
It's just starting to work, but just bringing it together, right? So so they had something like 68 data scientists, 42 data engineers, data management, 0. Right? Lots of architects. So it was almost like, okay, guys, there's a pretty clear gap we've got here when we set this organisation up. And so, they've gone through restructures and they're now putting that kind of structure in place.
And it's amazing, isn't it? So one of the most powerful roles I had in my old data team was data requirements. And they used to do all like the business or data requirements. So look to the business, do the business requirements, then match those to data requirements. And then they used to pass them off to the data modelers. But it was amazing how many times they got bypassed and people weren't, no, I just want you to build me it. And you're like, no, you need to first start off understanding what you want. You wouldn't ask an architect to build me a house and then just see what happens. You'd do all the analysis, wouldn't you? So I think it's really interesting how sometimes some of these roles get skipped over, go straight for, your data scientists can do it all. And it must be really hard to be a data scientist because the amount of burden that gets put on trying to do all these different roles that actually is not their forte.
And luckily the head of the chapter for data science, she is super supportive of everything, right? And she's supportive because she doesn't want to do it, but she knows it needs to be done, right? And she's like, yes, go Barry, go. And and she's always got an opinion, and we haven't argued yet. And I've kind of said to her, I can't wait till the day where we disagree on something, Tally, because that's going to be an interesting discussion, because up till now it's always like, I'm going to go and confront Tally about this, and she's like, yes, thank you, please do it. And I'm like, yes.
And do you think there's natural people within the organisations that are more on the CDO side? Because I think I found in my history, it's quite a lot of the business ones that are having problems are really happy to have you come in and help, but others push you away. Like IT tends to push you away because obviously I think they feel like maybe you're on their turf. Do you think there's natural roles in the executive that can help you or hinder?
Yeah, so I think whatever the head of IT, CIO is, that's got to be one. Finance has got to be the other one, because they're a massive support. HR is actually quite an important one for me, because if you think about an organisation where you want to get to, if you're selling products, you want to know what you've sold at what margin, who's done it, what their performance is like, what geography, all those kind of things, right? So that's what you would ideally want as an organisation. And people tend to forget about the fact that HR's got line management hierarchies, position management is a good way to understand how structures work and all those sorts of things. So I think at least those three are sort of super important. And depending on what organisation you're in, so research is kind of important where I am now. Claims was important at Allianz. So you just kind of make sure you've got at least 3 or 4 people to kind of get your support. And it's not easy, because generally most of those people have had bad, history with data, or people trying to do different things, and you're kind of taking stuff away from them.
Yeah, and what's when you go into a new organisation as CDO, what's the first thing you do to try and do a quick win or something to gain that traction and get people on board? What do you normally do?
I don't talk about data. It's the first thing I do. I try and understand what's going on in the organisation and what the pain points are. And then I can kind of go back and start thinking about how we can solve their problem. So I never try and promise too much too quickly. I always it's more about understanding and trying to get some simple messages across. So I use fix forward. So it's all about saying, well, if you're gonna change the organisation, you can't keep doing the same stuff. So everything we do going forward has to be different, and it has to be using these standards. And just getting those simple messages across to people is important, because it helps kind of get some momentum. And then if you can then start winding back their problems and saying, okay, so I remember you were telling me about this, and this was the problem you had, right? And this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I think we can, if we do this, this, and this, we can probably get there, but this is going to take 12 months, but you're going to see some quick wins here. That's the way you win people over, is by talking to them in their language, not by saying data's super important, I'm super important, we're going to create this massive data organisation. It's about kind of going backwards.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I almost think that CDOs are the babel fish. We do the translation, don't we? We have to be able to talk business, and then we have to be able to turn back to the teams and talk technical, and be able to do that translation and how you take the organisation forward. I think it's really interesting. So I was just thinking for some of mine, I've gone in, and it's almost been when things are crisis management, I think, that can really help, isn't it? I always say never waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
Because I think most of the time with data, it tends to be, they might think it's the business that's got the problem, but actually when you unpick it, it's the processes around how you're managing the data and how you then can be there to help, rather than being there, given too much structured governance or things that they don't need. So it's interesting. Have you got any thoughts of when you've gone in, have there been times when your crisis management has been an advantage? Yeah,
so that's about fix forward, right? So you pick what people are doing and make sure they do it in the right way. But I don't know about you, I've always found there's always common themes, right? So, HR is complaining about the same thing, finance is complaining about the same thing that marketing is complaining about. And when you can go to them and say, oh, you've got the same problem as John and Jill. What? This is their problem. People start to realise that actually there's a consistent problem in the organisation that needs to be fixed. And it's not just about allocating budget to fix this person's issue, because that's the other issue, right? Is the way budgets are allocated, it becomes a bit of a fight sometimes for money. And so if you're basically fixing the crisis or fixing the stuff that's happening in the organisation, you kind of just piggyback on that and say, right, let me come in and help you with that. And that's kind of the way I've kind of got money quickly.
Yeah, and I always think it's interesting as well with because I think data quality tends to be the thing that gets most of the focus, isn't it? And it's always that you get the money to fix things that actually, if you stopped doing some of those processes in that way, you wouldn't have to do it. But stopping something happening never gets the glory, doesn't it? But when you go, I've cleaned up all these records, everyone's really happy and they celebrate it. But actually, we should be saying, no, we didn't have any crises. So that's more of the benefit.
Yeah, and I'm not a fan of data cleansing, right? So, because like you, I've probably seen lots of people spend money and time cleaning up some stuff, and guaranteed in 3 or 6 months' time, it's back where it was again, right? So it's about finding the root cause of the problem and fixing that, rather than just doing data quality for data quality's sake, or data governance for data governance sake. Yeah.
Yeah, do you think there's any data disciplines as CDO that you've had more trouble explaining to the business?
Everything but reporting, probably. Because most people see a report But trying to explain an enterprise data model is difficult, right? So as soon as you go back from the report, then it's difficult. Lineage is a difficult concept for some reason. But if you express it as a process and then talk about how the data flows, people kind of get it. And I just think the linking everything up, right? So I always kind of say going in and creating a business glossary by itself has no value to anyone, right? It just doesn't. But if you can start linking it to process, to systems, to policies, to everything that kind of makes the organisation work, then all of a sudden it gets context, and then people can kind of consume it. So again, I don't generally talk about the technical stuff, I still don't get this right, but I try and talk about it from a business perspective. I think the other thing I've been doing badly recently is I'm super quick to jump to solutions, right? Because I've been doing this a while now, and I just go, oh, that's the answer then. And everyone's like, what? We still haven't understood the problem. And so I think you've got to take your time to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where we all get after time, because there's not much we haven't seen that is not following the same paths.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's probably why the CDO community is as it is, because I think we're all in the same position of, yep, you've got that one, yep. There's almost a structure, isn't there, to follow.
None of this stuff is rocket science, and none of it's new. It's been around for a while. What surprises me is that people keep trying to tackle it in the same way and then expecting a different result.
Well, it's a sign of madness, isn't it? And what about you? Have you managed to persuade your business or businesses previously about sharing data? Because that's obviously one of the things that the ODI, we're very passionate about, the collaborations. And then we've done some surveys where, organisations could do better for their business if they shared more data with others. But of course, that's part of the cultural change and almost being scared. Have you come across that in your roles as CDO?
For me, it's people. So one of the first things they said to me in this new role was, we've got to have data ownership. I said, yes, super important, super agree. But they see it as theirs, right? And I was like, no, it's the organisation's data. And what we've got to do, so research is a good example, where you've got all these people doing all these different research experiments. We've got to make sure that we can share that data in a data lake for machine learning, etc. But it's not your data. The term you might own, and you might own it, but that may be a temporary thing. But the reason you own it is because you're the expert who can describe this thing best for the organisation. So I think that's really, really important that people understand that there's no point in having terabytes and petabytes in a data lake if everyone can't get access to it and understand what context it can be used for. And so it's kind of that. There's lots of different steps you need to take to kind of get everyone to understand that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because ownership is one of the things that we try to almost discourage in a way. Yeah, as an organisation, you have it for IP, but if you try and wrap it up and hold on to it, then it's not going to help anyone.
Well, domains are the worst, right? So people say, I have to have an owner for product. You can't even tell me all the product data you've got. You don't even know what systems it's in. You don't even know what it means. Why you want someone to own it, right? It's not even ready to be owned. It's a bit like a house that you haven't built, right? You can own the house, but if there's nothing there, it's not worth owning it. So I think that if the CFO is the person, that's fine. But what I would say to that person is, so when I was doing BCBS 239, so it's kind of financial regulation, we picked apart a finance process where there was a piece of 2 data sets going in. 13 different teams handled that, and it came out the same, like it was mushed up all over, and it came out exactly the same way, believe me, as it was going in. Inefficiencies everywhere in the organisation. So it's not just about how the data flows, what it's used for, all those kind of things help you connect the organisation and make it more efficient. So it's not just about doing this for data's sake, it's actually about doing it to make the organisation much more efficient, much more transparent.
I was thinking, I think that the CFAs really support the CDOs. So I think actually it's about working together. I do think that process bit and coming from a different angle. Even though I'm just even thinking about a small and medium enterprise and how we can do things better with the data, just even mapping out those flows, just understanding some of that. I think we'll definitely become it from a different angle.
And at a high level, right? So I don't profess to kind of get into all the weeds, right? That's another problem that people do. They try and get into the detail too quickly, and then it just becomes a mess and nothing gets done. So I think it's about building, so we talk about data products and services, so things you need to do with data. And you need to think about the things you need to set up at the right level so you can support data scientists, so they can get some value. So it's about building that infrastructure across the entire data suite. So if you need to build an enterprise data model, don't build the whole model. Just take one use case, build it up, move to the next thing. If you need to do data management, do the same thing. So use that as your vehicle to kind of get, it's about building up your infrastructure, but in a really, really smart way. So you're doing things incrementally, but you've got to have the whole portfolio. So you have to have data quality, you have to have your glossary, you'll have to have a process for you have to have some lineage. You've got to build all that up so everything works together. And it's just about looking at the organisation and saying, well, I've already got 68 data scientists, I've already got 55 data engineers, I probably don't need any more of those, but I do need some of this stuff here, right? And then that means they can do their job better. And so it's just about building all those components up at the right level. You just talk about problems. So, you talk to me about this problem, right? The problem reason you've got that problem is this, you don't know this, you can't see this. It's quite obvious when you start talking about it in business terms, why they can't do the things they can't do. And then you say, and you've got the reason you can't do your data is because you don't know what your process looks like, you haven't got any of your systems anywhere. So you just kind of got to put it in their language and say, this is why you can't do what you need to do, or this will help you do what you need to do. So I can tell you I've turned down more jobs in the last 8 years than I've ever had than I've ever thought I would, for that exact reason. So I've gone in for a job interview and I've asked them the questions and said, this is what we're going to do, this is why we need to do this, and they clearly aren't ready. So I've just said, I'm not the right person for the job. And I can tell you in all of those cases, I know someone who got the job and they basically left in 6 months because the organisation just wasn't ready. So, and culture takes a long time to fix. So you're absolutely right. So I think the BA, or what I would call a business analyst, is super critical for the data foundation or management, whatever tribe you want to call it. And you either have it in your team or you have it in an internal, external team, and you basically buddy them up. And then effectively you cross-train them, so that way you've got people who now have got a data lens plus some BAs, and you've got BAs who know data better. And so that's how I've done it, because I was a BA a long time ago. And I think that the reason I've got the views I've got now is because I've seen everything break, because there just wasn't people who were competent at understanding how things worked in an organisation.
Yeah, I've done the same. So I have my data analyst trained in BA skills and vice versa. And it's a must-have, I think.
I think it's about describing the breadth of exposure you get to an organisation. And then people who are bored quickly, hungry for learning, will go, yes, that's me. Because I think there are very few roles that allow you to get your fingers across an organisation, and that means you can understand more, and there are very few roles. So we just need to kind of make that visible to people, and I think it'll attract the right people, because it's not for everyone.
Yeah, we both said, didn't we, what we've got in common is we get bored easily, and we like to continuously learn. So if you want that, then data is the place to be, because the turnover is so quick and what you have to do. And I think inspiring the next generation, I think it's also about getting into the schools, it's getting into universities, it's actually showing the potential, it's talking about it, it's doing things like this, isn't it, to show that actually there is a career. Because 30 years ago, this wasn't a thing, it is now. So if we can start promoting how good it is for those who have got a lowest attention span and wants to keep learning, it'd be brilliant.